There are weddings, and then there are moments that seem to stop the entire world. On April 29, 2011, millions of people around the globe turned on their televisions, gathered with family and friends, and watched history unfold. It was the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton. For one extraordinary day, London became the center of the world. The streets were filled with crowds. Flags waved from windows. Thousands gathered outside Buckingham Palace and along the royal procession route. And millions more watched from home, waiting for one unforgettable moment, the moment Catherine would walk down the aisle and meet the man she had loved for years. But behind all the ceremony, the crowns, the uniforms, and the breathtaking royal traditions, was something much simpler. A love story. William and Catherine had first met years before they became one of the most famous couples on earth. Their relationship began at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. At first, they were simply two young students. William was already one of the most recognizable young men in the world. Catherine was a university student who had no idea that her life would eventually become part of royal history. But over time, their friendship developed into something more. And the world began watching. Their relationship wasn't always perfect. Like many young couples, they experienced difficult moments. They even separated for a short time. But eventually, they found their way back to each other. And when William finally proposed, the world knew that the future King of Britain had found the woman he wanted by his side. Then came the day everyone had been waiting for. April 29, 2011. London woke up to a completely different atmosphere. The streets were packed. People had traveled from around the world just to experience the historic occasion. Some had camped outside for days. Others stood behind barriers hoping to catch even a glimpse of the royal family. And as the morning arrived, the anticipation became almost impossible to describe. Then came the first unforgettable images. Prince William arrived at Westminster Abbey wearing his military uniform. Calm, focused, but underneath that confident expression was a man waiting for the biggest moment of his life. He was about to see his bride. And then, the doors opened. Catherine Middleton appeared. For millions watching around the world, it was one of those moments that seemed almost unreal. She walked slowly through the Abbey in a breathtaking wedding dress designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen. Her dress immediately became one of the most talked about wedding dresses in modern history. The long train, the lace details, the elegant veil, and the famous Cartier tiara. Everything about the look was carefully chosen. But despite all the cameras, all the attention, and all the royal tradition, Catherine appeared remarkably composed. And as she walked toward William, his expression said everything. He was seeing his bride for the first time that day. Inside Westminster Abbey, history was being made. The ceremony brought together centuries of royal tradition with a very modern love story. William and Catherine exchanged their vows in front of family, friends, world leaders, celebrities, and millions of viewers around the globe. But perhaps the most memorable part was how personal some of the moments felt. Despite the enormous scale of the occasion, there were moments when it seemed as though the couple had forgotten about the cameras. They looked at each other. They smiled. They laughed. And for a few seconds, the enormous crowd outside seemed to disappear. It was simply William and Catherine. A bride and groom beginning a new chapter together. Then came the moment millions had been waiting for. The couple emerged from Westminster Abbey as husband and wife. And suddenly, the streets of London erupted. Crowds cheered. Flags waved. People celebrated. And the newly married couple began their journey through London. Their carriage procession became one of the defining images of the day. The gold state coach would come later during the celebrations, but William and Catherine first traveled in the magnificent 1902 state landau. They waved to the crowds as they made their way toward Buckingham Palace. Everywhere they looked, there were people. Thousands upon thousands of them. And yet Catherine and William continued smiling and waving. The atmosphere was extraordinary. This wasn't simply a wedding. It was a global celebration. People who had never met the couple felt as though they were witnessing something personal. A moment they would remember for the rest of their lives. And when the couple finally arrived at Buckingham Palace, the next iconic chapter was about to begin. The famous balcony appearance. For generations, the balcony of Buckingham Palace has been the setting for some of the most memorable moments in British royal history. And now, William and Catherine stood there together. Husband and wife. The crowd below erupted with excitement. And then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Their first public kiss as a married couple. One kiss became two. And the crowd went wild. It was one of the most photographed moments of the entire wedding. But what made the moment so memorable wasn't simply the kiss. It was the reaction, the enormous crowd, the cheering, the laughter, and the realization that the young couple who had met as university students had just become one of the world's most famous married couples.
But behind the spectacular public celebration was another important story: Catherine's journey. Before becoming the Duchess of Cambridge, before becoming Princess of Wales, and before becoming a future queen, she was simply Catherine Middleton. A young woman from an ordinary family who found herself entering one of the world's most watched institutions. Her transition into royal life would not always be easy. Every outfit would be photographed. Every expression could become a headline. Every public appearance would be analyzed. But throughout the years, Catherine developed a reputation for being composed, elegant, and dedicated to her responsibilities. And William faced his own enormous responsibility. As the future king, his life had never truly belonged entirely to himself. Every decision mattered, every appearance mattered, and one day, his wife would stand beside him as queen. That future may have seemed very distant on their wedding day, but the journey had already begun.
The wedding also carried a deeper meaning for the British royal family. William was the son of King Charles and the late Princess Diana. His wedding naturally brought memories of his mother flooding back. Diana had been one of the most famous women in the world. And although she was not there to witness her son's wedding, her presence could be felt throughout the day. William had grown up under extraordinary circumstances. The world watched him as a child, then watched him grow into a young man. And now, the world was watching him begin his own family. For many people, seeing William standing at the altar created an emotional connection to the past. It was as though an entire generation had watched him grow up, and was now watching him step into adulthood. As the celebrations continued, London remained filled with excitement. The royal family gathered together. Guests celebrated, and the newlyweds enjoyed their first moments as a married couple. But eventually, the cameras began to move away. The crowds began to disappear, and the extraordinary wedding day slowly came to an end. For William and Catherine, however, this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning. Their wedding marked the start of a new life together. A life that would eventually include children, royal tours, public duties, moments of happiness, moments of difficulty, and an increasing role at the center of the British monarchy. Looking back now, the wedding is more than just a collection of beautiful photographs. It's a time capsule. The hairstyles, the fashion, the crowds, the uniforms, the cars, the royal traditions, and, of course, the young couple at the center of it all. At the time, William and Catherine were beginning their married life. But history had something much bigger planned for them. The young prince who stood inside Westminster Abbey would eventually become king. And the woman who walked toward him in that unforgettable wedding dress would one day stand beside him as queen. That makes the images from 2011 even more fascinating today. Because we're not simply looking at a wedding anymore. We're looking at the beginning of a future reign. And perhaps that's why this royal wedding remains so memorable. Because beneath all the grandeur, there was a simple human story. Two people met. They became friends. They fell in love. They faced challenges. They found their way back to each other. And eventually, they stood together in front of the world and promised to spend their lives together. The cameras captured everything. The dress, the crowds, the balcony, the carriage, the royal family, the historic moments. But the most important image may have been much simpler. William looking at Catherine, and Catherine looking back at William. For just a moment, they weren't future king and queen. They weren't two of the most famous people on earth. They were simply newlyweds, two people beginning a life together. More than a decade later, the photographs still feel remarkably powerful. The crowds may have gone home. The flowers eventually disappeared. The wedding decorations were taken down. And the world moved on. But those images remain. A bride walking through Westminster Abbey. A nervous groom waiting at the altar. A carriage moving through cheering crowds. And two newlyweds appearing on the Buckingham Palace balcony. Moments that millions of people watched live, and millions more would later watch again. Because some moments become memories. And some memories become history. April 29, 2011 was both. It was a wedding, but it was also the beginning of one of the most important chapters in the modern British royal family. And when we look back at those incredible images today, we aren't just seeing Prince William and Catherine on their wedding day. We're seeing the beginning of the story of a future king and queen. A story that is still being written. And perhaps that's what makes their royal wedding so unforgettable. Because sometimes, history doesn't begin with a coronation. Sometimes, it begins with a bride walking down an aisle, and a groom waiting at the end. And that was the day William and Catherine became husband and wife. A day the world watched. A day millions celebrated. And a royal wedding that will remain etched in history for generations to come.